I'm David from Levika Photography, and today, finally, I am checking out the Tamron 24mm f2.8. I don't know why I said checking out. I've had this lens for like 4 or 5 months. Today I'm giving you an in-depth, detailed review of the Tamron 24mm f2.8. And this is the III OSD version, and I'm doing it on the A7R IV. So let's just go ahead and get started and start looking at the specs of this thing, so that way you guys know what you're up against. The Tamron OSD 3 24mm lens is ultra light due to its plasticky polymer body, and this thing comes in at a blistering 215 grams or just under 8 ounces. And it also has this lens hood, but the lens hood, you can see how shallow it is really kind of useless unless you're shooting at high noon with the sun directly above you. It may help a tiny bit. So let's go ahead and just take that off. Now it also has a 67mm filter thread on the front, which I really like. And the reason why I'm saying that is Tamron's entire lineup for Sony E-mount are all 67mm threads. So it doesn't matter which lens you buy, you'll be able to use the same filter on different lenses. So this lens has a 7-bladed rounded aperture, which is pretty standard for a lens this size. And it has an OSD stepping motor, which is supposed to be fast and quiet. Elements wise, this is 10 elements in 9 groups, and 3 of those elements are low dispersion elements, which again is kind of the new generation of lens where they can really design this stuff to have almost no chromatic aberrations. And it also has a special coating called a bar coating. That's what I like to call it. So it's a broadband anti-reflection coating that's supposed to help reduce flares and ghosting. So we'll have to see how well that works. And it's also considered to be moisture and dust resistant, but realistically this has a heavy-duty gasket on the back. But enough hyperbabble, let's get into the testing part of it. So what you're hearing right here is a little bit of clicking actually coming from the autofocus motor. So this is what the lens actually sounds like on the camera. Now macro mode, the autofocus is pretty slow, and you can see how it's taking its time focusing in, but it does get really close. In this test, the camera is mounted to a tripod, and you can see the image actually kind of jiggling around a little bit. This is because it's not matching up with Sony's optical stabilization for some reason, and I don't know why it's doing this. It's really strange. But you can see here again the autofocus is pretty slow, and at night this gets much worse. In photography mode, it actually seems to autofocus pretty well. It does suffer in low light, but in regular conditions it seems to be fast and accurate. Alright, LEDs in the studio. These fare a little bit worse. There's a few little smudgy spots on there, and the thing is my lens is clean, so I'm not sure why it's doing that, but if we get it off in the corners, you can see it. Yeah, there we go. Now we got some lens flare going on. Still pretty well controlled. Not bad. Alright, lens flare on the A7R III. As I get closer to the sun through this tree, you get a little bit of lens flare coming from it, but really it's pretty well controlled with the sun. So let's take a look at the image quality, and really quick I just wanted to show you that this lens has some macro capability to it. So these were all shot at f6.3, and yeah, it actually does a pretty good job. Now these were shot probably 5 to 6 inches away. This was as close as you can possibly get at just under 5 inches away. This one probably about the same. This is also shot at f6.3, I believe. Yep. This is a good example of what the bokeh looks like. So in most situations, the bokeh is very pleasing and smooth. You can see this was shot at f2.8, and we're just barely hitting focus here. but it's extremely smooth in the background. Everything else is just really buttery. This one was also shot at f6.3 at 5 inches away. Now this was also shot at f5.6. The 5.6 is really kind of the lens's sweet spot for the center, or really close to it. And you can see that it's pretty sharp. We have a little bit of fall off in this corner, but overall, that is really good. Now this was chalk rubbed on a wall, or actually construction crayon. And this was shot at f2.8. And so you can see how thin your sharpness plane really gets, but the f2.8 stays pretty sharp. I mean, it's really sharp in the center. So let's look at some regular images. So a couple weeks ago I did this shoot for an artist, and she was creating a life-size bronze and wanted reference photos. So we had this model get on a Lazy Susan, and we rotated this thing around while I shot her at 20 different angles. And this is just one image out of it, and I just wanted to show you what this looks like. It is really clean and really sharp. And the thing is, my studio is not really big, so I needed to go wider than normal. So wider than, say, 28mm using the Tamron. This worked out perfect, and I like the 24mm because it doesn't have that zooming distortion that wider lenses have. So it's a very natural looking wide angle. This is the film plane sharpness test, and yeah, Ted Forbes came up with this, and I stole it because it's a great test. And basically what you do is you set the camera on the ground, you focus about 1/3 of the frame up, depending upon what the focal length is of the lens. You just want to have that out so it's in a high texture area, which this is. And then from there you go into Photoshop and you go to filters and then find edges, and this is what you get. And this actually tells a lot about the lens. And so you can see that the sharpest part of the lens is actually through here, so it's a little off center. And this could be kind of a problem, except this area that's not center is actually holding up very well. It's still really sharp. It's just not as concentrated and dense as this side. But because of this test, when I started doing it, I did this to all my lenses, and I ended up selling 2 of them because I didn't like how they reacted in this area, simply because I knew I wouldn't have a sharp film plane when I was shooting something flat. And it really does make a difference. Same image with lens corrections turned on. And you can see that this area that's a little softer is now more spread out. Let me just go back from here to here. And basically what that is because of the distortion corrections, it's actually taking away from the sharpness of the film plane. So it's becoming a little bit of a problem, although really not that big of a deal with this lens. Vignetting. So this is just a white wall, and I just wanted to show you how mellow and yet dramatic this vignetting actually is. So on the Tamron 28-75 that I tested last year, and I still have that lens and I use it quite a bit, the center is much brighter and it's more like a ball shape almost in brightness, whereas this one is a lot more linear. On the 28-75 at 28, it's really dark in these extreme corners, and then it travels out just a little bit to get to an area where it's kind of normal all the way across. This lens is 2 3/4 stops dark from the extreme corner all the way to the center, but it's more of a linear gradient, which I really like. So I'm actually okay with the vignetting on this lens. Now this is what it looks like corrected, and in my opinion, this feels like it's overcorrecting just a little bit, although easy fix. Now let's talk about real-world distortion that you can actually see with this brick wall. So this is f2.8, and this is what it looks like corrected at f2.8. Now, this is where I have an issue with this lens. I can't stand the spiral distortion, and you can see from the top, it kind of comes out and then up and then over and then out again. It almost has a little bit of a mustache effect. It's not actually a true spherized object, so it's very hard to correct. But luckily, the lens distortion corrections actually correct this pretty well. The problem is between this and this, we lose a little bit of resolution. So this is the same image, and it's shot at f2.8, and it's the center of the frame. So this side over here is uncorrected. This side is corrected. And you can see the center sharpness is fine on both. Maybe a little softer on this side over here, but not by much. But once you get into the corners, you can start to see the difference. And because of the distortion correction, that really softens up that corner quite a bit. So not only is it making it brighter, but it's taking the distortion out and stretching it. And this actually affects the resolution numbers. All right, so this is f2.8, and then this is f4, and this is where it's sharpest in the center, f11, and this is f22. And really quick, you can see that its diffraction is setting in at f22, and it's almost unusable. Really, I wouldn't go past f16 on this lens if I was using it all the time, but f11 actually holds up really well. And if we go into the extreme corners, you can see that at f4 it's okay, f2.8 it's okay, f11 it actually looks really good. And to me that's f8, f11 is about where the extreme corners hold up their best. But at f22, again, diffraction is set in, you don't really want to use it. Now if we compare those to the corrected images, then now what we're seeing is after everything is corrected, it's even softer. So f22 is just completely unusable at this point. Basically what we're seeing is this lens in the middle at f2.8 is about 51 lines per millimeter of resolution, which is pretty good. At f4 that hops up to 55, and then at f11 we're probably back down to like 48, somewhere around there. And then at f22 it's actually pretty low at like 29, so not super great. So you're probably wondering, how does this work on APS-C size? Actually, it works pretty well, even a little bit better, because it crops out the nastiness of the extreme corners. So any Sony A6000 through A6600, you're going to see a really sharp center and decent corners. Environmental portraits, I think, is where it really shines. And let me just explain to you why. So this is Sierra, and she's a model that's come in and helped me out quite a bit on other videos. But you can see I haven't done anything crazy to this photo. Just some minor blemishes, cleanups. But this is really sharp, really clean looking, no chromatic aberrations, beautiful color rendering. And I think this looks great. So this is what it looks like with lens corrections turned on. And this is where it gets kind of disappointing, because right out of the box it wants to fix the vignetting. And I actually like the vignetting. I think that looks better. And her natural shape matches this view more than this view. I know her face really well, and to me this looks more natural than this. Now moving on, again, this is with distortions turned off and just some minor blemishes fixed, but really it's just really nice and sharp, and I'm using eye focusing on this. Lens corrections turned on, this does some weird stuff, and the reason why is because I've got her head too high in the frame, so now it's pulling on her forehead a little bit and making it look a little bit more elongated. And of course the removal of the vignette, it just doesn't look as good as that. To me this looks very natural. Going wide with it is a different story. So this again is with lens corrections turned off. And let me just show you the sharpness here. I think that absolutely looks amazing. It renders really nicely, and the bokeh in real world situations looks really pretty good. You get a little bit of onioning, it's not that bad. Tiny bit of cat's eye in the corners, but it's not overwhelming. In areas where it's low contrast, the bokeh is actually very smooth, especially for a 7-bladed aperture. I think it does a great job. But here's where things get interesting. So, lens distortions turned off, lens distortions turned on, which I think takes away from the photo completely and makes it look overexposed. Lens distortions turned on, but vignetting turned off. This is where, to me, it looks really good. Because now it looks more of like there's a spotlight on her, and so you can see that her face is illuminated really well, but everything else is nice and dark around it.
And your eye immediately draws into her face and then goes across here, and then as your eye wanders, you pick up on this. And to me, that's a really well-balanced photo. And I think that this just looks really good. So I think this lens is ideal for environmental portraiture if that's what you're into.
All right, let me just sum this up for you guys. First, let me tell you the things that I really don't like about this lens. I guess the first thing would be that terrible sounding autofocus. It's not quiet, it's not silent. You can hear it when you're filming. Now the other problem too is in video. I noticed with both the A7R IV and the A7R III that it doesn't really like the optical stabilization of the camera, so even though if you're trying to hold it smooth, sometimes it will just jump. And you can tell that it's the sensor moving, not the camera body. So that's kind of a problem too that I think needs to be addressed, probably by Sony in a firmware update, but Sony probably doesn't care about Tamron, but they should because they own a large part of it. So I don't know, maybe they'll fix it in a firmware update. The second thing that I really don't like about this is the t-stop rating. Now the 28-75 Tamron lens for the Sony E-mount f2.8, that lens has a t-stop rating of 3.1 and it's an f2.8. So that's pretty common, that's not exactly unheard of. This has a t-stop of 3.3. And I have a feeling that it's because of how it vignettes versus that lens. Now with the Tamron 28-75, the way it vignettes is it's got kind of a large area that's pretty much really bright and kind of where it should be, and then it gets darker in the corners. With this one, it's more of a radial gradient going from the inside out, which is not bad on this, but I think because of that, it has a slower t-stop rating. And the autofocus isn't nearly as good as that lens is either. So two things that are a major downside. Number three, the barrel distortion on this lens is pretty much atrocious. It should be a fisheye lens. It is nowhere near rectilinear as it should be. There's nothing rectilinear about it. It's just a big bulbous fisheye that gets corrected in software. Now in video you don't really see this because the built-in lens profiles are taking care of that. So that's a good thing, but in video the autofocus is really noisy and glitchy, so that's a bad thing. So yeah, there's that. And it also doesn't help the corners when you correct for that barrel distortion either. Let's talk about the things that are really great about it. One, it doesn't weigh anything. This lens is so light and it's small, and it shares the same filter threads as the 28-75. So if for some reason you just want a cheap wide-angle lens and you're looking at the 24 or 20 to complement your 28-75, your filters will work on here. So that's a good thing. The other thing that I like about it too is, I'll hold this up here, this has got a weather-sealed gasket on the back. Now this lens doesn't have an IP rating, but they say it is dust and moisture resistant. Lens flare is not an issue with this, so that's a good thing. The bokeh is as expected. In high contrast situations it's not so great, but in normal situations it's actually very pleasant. I really like it. You can get this close to your subject. So it's got a 1:2 macro, which means it's not 2:1, so it's not going to be double life size. It's going to be half life size of what it sees in front of the sensor. Now the other thing is the price point. This lens right now is on sale for $300, usually $349. So yeah, I think it's worth the money if you want a cheap and expensive prime. Now if you do video, just avoid this lens altogether. It's not worth it. So anyway, I hope you guys like this video. Leave me a comment, subscribe to my channel for more information like this, and we'll talk to you guys later. See ya.